In the annals of time, riding social forces as they crest and crash onto the shores of history, some would-be heroes stumble but manage to recover their breath. Others are reduced to the flotsam and jetsam of nostalgia. These others are our subjects. They are the vanquished, 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 vanquished.
Welcome to The Vanquished. Anders J. Lee here with my co-host Freddie G.
I'm so happy to be here.
And we are joined by comedian Nonye Brown-West.
Hello, I'm Nonye. Nice to be here as well.
Thanks for coming on for this very special event. This is a historic moment in the history of the podcast. We are doing our first person who actually was president, which you would think is the opposite of what we're talking about on the show. However, this guy lost and also just died. And we try to be topical with people who are in the news for a variety of reasons, and death is a reason to be in the news.
No, I mean, if you lose, he only won 6 states in his reelection, Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
And then they lose the White House for 12 years. He is vanquished.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
He's a loser.
giant L on this guy's forehead. He is an interesting character. I'm trying to remember the first time I heard about Jimmy Carter. My parents are both fans of his. My mom said she went to Plains, Georgia at one point while he was president, and there's just nothing there. But it was just one of those things, like, you know, just to say you went there. But what are you? What were your first memories or recollections of JC?
I just knew he was the guy who lost to Reagan, and people would make fun of him. He was ineffective. My dad would make fun of the Mariatta's boat lift. So in 2005, I was in Israel on birthright, and I'm in the big hotel. It might have been the King David Hotel for all I know, or one of those big ones. And Jimmy Carter's on the same floor, and people are going up to him, and he seemed really nice. So I have been in the same sort of room as Jimmy Carter.
Oh, that's interesting. Because I thought, wasn't he pro-Palestine after his...
Yeah.
I think he hadn't written the book yet.
Yeah,
Oh,
that would have.
okay.
Yeah, because if he had written that book at that point, then he called it apartheid, and we're on birthright, we would have chased him.
Right.
But that was before he wrote the book.
Yeah, that would have, but that would have been like 1 year before. So he was probably writing the book.
Yeah.
He was
And
there studying you guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
He probably made it into the book, like, there are these crazy Zionists.
He probably looked at Fred and was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna change my mind."
I don't think there were any Palestinians in the hotel, so it was an apartheid, probably.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So he definitely was studying you guys. That's fascinating. My first memory of him, my parents were fans of him. They did make fun of him. My family's very political. I think you know that. But they were fans of his random things, like his environmentalism or things like that, things he did after his presidency. My mother was sad when he passed away, and we had to remind her he was 100.
Oof.
And and, you know, that's an age to be when you die. It's a pretty good age to be when you die.
I will say, if he wasn't religious, I think he would have died early. I don't think he believed in, like, taking a bunch of morphine and going to sleep. It seemed like he let himself die the natural death in the most excruciating way.
Right. I think he wanted to die at 33, which is when Jesus died.
yeah.
But in America, you have to be 35 to be president. So he was like, okay, what's the next coolest number for me to die? 100. I'm going to make it to that. Because I think he sort of thought of himself as the second coming in a way.
Wow.
And at the time, in 1976, people were saying JC, Jimmy Carter, also Jesus Christ, same initials. Also that, you know, I think of this meme that you see on the internet sometimes where it's like people castigated him, but he was right. And it's like a picture of Jesus and people like throwing stones. And the more like people would get mad at him about something, the more he would dig his heels in. And sometimes that's a bad thing, but sometimes it's a good thing. Like on Palestine, he was really, because he thought he had the power of God behind him. And so he stuck it out to 100. And I do remember a few months ago, his 100th birthday, where I don't know why he didn't just like stop right after that, but they had him on this lawn in a wheelchair, and it was just disturbing image.
Brian Young, he was very, you know, he honestly could have been on the cover of GQ. That's how hot he looked.
Yeah, I mean, I said at the time they maybe should have considered like a closed casket 100th birthday for Jimmy Carter. He's again, good in bad ways, like he got elected at a very specific moment where if it had been any other election, I don't think he would have won. And could say he was a victim of circumstance as president too. A lot of self-inflicted wounds, but a lot of crises happening that were kind of beyond his control when he was president.
But I will say every president, I think, is a megalomaniac. Like, you have to kind of be completely full of yourself to want that job in the first place. And I think there's a lot of stuff that they learn about once they're in there that changes them, makes them evil people. Although Jimmy probably was a good old boy anyway. Yeah. So there might have been some evil there already. I'm not a huge fan of religion. I guess I believe in something, right? I would call myself agnostic. So I just feel like people who are hyper religious, like, not to offend any fans of you guys on here, there's already something a little sus there. Plus, he was a Southern white man, so let's be real.
I agree. Yeah, I'm an atheist. Yeah. Jimmy Carter's nowhere right now. He no longer exists. He's not in heaven or hell.
Yeah, I mean, he is. I'm secular agnostic, but I was baptized Lutheran. And he does appeal to a very small, specific strain within Christianity where it's kind of like a self-flagellating tendency to, like, yes, I need to be a better person and conserve things and be prudent and be modest, but you still think it's like God that's making you do this stuff and commanding everything. But a very, like, moralistic thing that comes into his politics and that of his vice president, Walter Mondale, who's Lutheran Scandinavian from Minnesota, which is why people in Minnesota still really like Jimmy Carter. But that if for both of them, it's like, we have to conserve things, turn down the thermostat, and you're going to pay more taxes too. And there's like a small sliver of the country, at least in the 70s and 80s, that was like, yes, I want to hear that. But to most people, understandably, that's like, why are you running for president and telling me that you're going to make my life worse? That's crazy.
I mean, Reagan's saying we're going to make America great again.
Right.
Oh, God.
Yeah. But he is the son of another James Earl Carter, so he should be Jimmy Carter Jr. But yeah, middle name is Earl. That was just what his dad went by, was Earl. And I don't think you have that same branding if he's Earl Carter.
No.
Because you can't really, Early is not really you can't add that Y to the end of Earl because that's a word.
When his dad was a racist, owned a bunch of, he basically owned a farming empire with a bunch of sharecroppers. Yeah. So if you're a racist farmer, you're Earl. If you're kind of nice, you're called Jimmy, I guess.
Right.
What do we think, though? Do we believe that Jimmy Carter was never racist, ever? I feel like he definitely was.
He did racist things.
Yeah, exactly.
He definitely did racist things.
He did
racist things during his presidency. He was anti-apartheid to a point, right? But then he also just funded a bunch of acts of terror on people who were non-white, right? So
yeah.
So, I mean, it's interesting because I do feel like he got the Clinton treatment amongst black voters, where they might have been like, "Oh, he's good, he likes us," but no, he wasn't.
Right?
Racist, probably, right?
Yeah, I mean, But I think anybody who goes to like Brazil and seeks out I think it's called a Confederado, like the town where all the Confederates fled to, and is like, he was like moved to tears by that. That's crazy. Yeah.
Being moved to tears by the Confederacy in a different country is insane. You just gotta say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does. Like in when he's running for governor, he shows pictures of his opponent with black people.
Right.
And like, oh, he loves black people too much. And it's like, well, that guy's the owner of the Atlanta Hawks. That's why he's pictured with the black people. Yeah.
Wow.
He probably still was pretty racist. The other guy as well. Yeah.
That gubernatorial campaign is kind of the perfect encapsulation of Jimmy Carter on this question, because he's running, he has Confederate flags, he's sort of coding himself as a Dixiecrat, but he says he's against busing, so he knows what he's doing, but also behind the scenes he has sort of the black political class in Georgia, meeting with them behind closed doors and saying, I don't actually mean all that stuff. And yeah, and strangely enough, it's actually an example of when he becomes governor, he is part of this, what was called the New South, where they were progressive on civil rights. They were obeying the federal laws and trying to integrate, but they're also very fiscally conservative and opposed programs that were helping. Yeah, predominantly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the big thing with Jimmy Carter. He's not a liberal. He never claimed to be liberal. He's not fiscally liberal. He's fiscally conservative. He doesn't really want to help poor people. He wants to reform welfare, simplify government, all these just terrible things. And then my whole life, people told me he was the quintessential liberal, and it's like, no, that's just propaganda.
Right.
Well, I think it does have something to do with his activities after his presidency as well, though.
Yeah.
Because he was definitely visited by 3 ghosts after he was president, like 100%.
Right. One was Palestinian. Yeah.
Yeah, because he did like a 180 where he really was trying to be a better man. He wasn't just painting ugly pictures of dogs. Like, you know, he like actually got out there and was trying to repent.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
Well, it's one of those weird things too, with where his dad owns this farm and employs sharecropper families, and so and they're predominantly black, so he's around them, and he grows up around black people, but they're all like working for his family, so it's that kind of
like, you know, basically slaves that make a little bit of money.
Right.
That's what sharecropping was.
Yeah.
Wikipedia says that his family were cotton farmers for generations, and it's like, well, they are the ones farming the cotton. They had slaves back then.
Exactly.
yeah.
He just owned cotton farms.
Right. And they're from Plains, Georgia. His dad had a general store, farmer, and was in the military. And Jimmy was a very thin boy as a kid. And so you found this out. He went on a special diet that maybe this is...
bananas, yeah. This is good as a guy who's on keto. Bananas are not a good weight loss food. Yeah, bananas will fatten you up. He went on a banana diet to gain weight so he could be in the Navy. He really wanted to be in the Navy.
Wow.
Why the Navy?
It's a good question. We're going to need to dig deeper.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe he saw the coastline. He probably was like, I'm living in a plane in Plains, and I want to go to the sea. I got to get away from here.
Yeah, that makes sense. Georgia's kind of like a landlocked...
Yeah.
Yeah, it has some coastline, but not much, right? So
Okay.
maybe he wanted to see the ocean.
Yeah, and also science. He's a big science guy, and you need that for...
The Air Force and the Navy are definitely the 2 most... Unless you want to, special forces.
Right.
But, yeah.
He's not decisive enough to fly a plane. I'll say that. Also, the Air Force. Yeah, the planes might have been kind of new when he was growing up. Even he's so old.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
I was even going to say that before. Like the Democrats being liberal, right, was like new at the time too.
Yeah.
So it was literally only 10 years old when he thought of being president at all. So.
Yeah.
The New Deal. Yeah, the New Deal started when he was 9. He's 1924 to 2020.
Right. Yeah. And his dad, I don't think, was a fan of the New Deal, if I'm remembering that correctly.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
I don't know that he was
either.
either.
The Voting Rights Act. That's what I was talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But black people couldn't vote in the South till he was old enough to be running for governor and stuff.
Yeah. But he goes to Plains High School from 37 to 41 and doesn't go to 12th grade because the school does not have 12th grade.
Interesting.
I don't know if that was
So where did he learn calculus and trigonometry? Yeah. That's so crazy.
It's too liberal. Yeah, they couldn't fit it in the budget.
That's actually a great example of why we don't need to teach kids that stuff, because if you're like Jimmy Carter, you'll just learn it anyway, and then everyone else doesn't need it. So that's my argument. But he, very good student, and there's an anecdote that he was passed over for valedictorian after he and his friends cut class to drive a hot rod around downtown Plains, and that got mentioned in the town newspaper, and so because of that, he didn't become the valedictorian. So I think since then he was like, I'm never gonna be a bad boy again.
That's his one bad boy moment. Yeah. I think even at this point, he's probably already dating Rosalind, and then he's never with another woman or anything.
Right. They're
Allegedly.
He does cheat in his heart, as he admits later. But they are kind of an OTP. There's I found it weird in the documentary on the PBS doc about him. Rosalind is interviewed, and she says that she, I think, knew his sister. And his sister had a photo of Jimmy, and she looked at the photo, and it was the most handsome man she had ever seen, which is a nice story. But if you look at him at that age, in my opinion, not the most handsome man I've ever seen. It's just he's a very pointy nose, kind of weird looking, and
a little anemic. I'm not going.
Yeah, he's so thin he had to go to banana diet, and also I think Rosalind is an attractive woman, but they look similar, and I always find that odd when it's kind of like.
A lot.
It does. But it's like the Van Houtens from The Simpsons. You're not. I just something bothers me conceptually about people who look related, who date and are just like madly in love.
Did you hear that? This was probably all just to sell OnlyFans, but over the pandemic, there were two gay men, and this happens a lot in the gay community specifically, where people date people that look just like them. But there are two gay men who got blood tests because they're about to get married, and they wanted to have a child, so they're blood testing to see which one of them would be able to give the sperm or whatever for not donation, but to have the child with a surrogate. And they found out they were brothers.
Oh my God!
And they still got married because it was legal in their state. Because incest is only, I guess that's incest. Incest is only illegal in like 13 states. It's not illegal in a lot of states.
Wow.
So they still got married, and they started an OnlyFans.
Oh my God!
I know, it's crazy.
What state was it?
How much is it?
I feel like it was California. It's like the states that have never needed incest rules. There's no law against it or something.
I mean,
I will say laws against porn.
Right. But that was crazy to me. I think they were half brothers at least.
Okay.
But they were
at least
brothers.
that's something. Yeah.
They were brothers.
I mean, I will say I only think incest should be banned because it, and people end up like me and can like move their scalp and ears at the same time. But other than that, there's nothing. I don't think there's anything unethical. It's weird, but there's not anything necessarily unethical if you're like two gay guys.
In the gay community, it's like that's the one community where you can argue incest doesn't matter, but it's still gross. Let's be real.
Yeah.
Like, that's still kind of nasty.
Yeah. I will judge you if you do it, but I don't think you should like go to jail for.
I think it is gross. It was good enough for the Pharaohs. So.
Exactly, right?
And the Roosevelts.
And the Habsburgs, although they all looked disgusting towards the end, they were just terrible people. They invented the white supremacy in Europe as we know it, really. So
right,
absolutely, yeah. The Habsburgs bred until the last guy couldn't have kids, then they lost control of Spain. So there is eventually nature will take its course.
Right.
Well, there's still Habsburgs blood in
Europe.
They
got to keep in Austria. They were right, but in Spain they lost Spain because King Carlos could not get an erection.
Even I think the British royal family still has Habsburgs blood.
Probably.
Yeah,
it looks like it. I mean, it is interesting how...
It looks like it. True. That is true. Correct.
In America, we associate inbreeding with, like, the South and poor people, but it's a really... Yeah, it's a very widespread, and only recently have we kind of moved away from that. But, yeah. So he's... they get married, Rosalind and Jimmy, and he goes to the Naval Academy and gets a Bachelor of Science, 1946, kind of a quiet guy. Apparently, he doesn't participate in hazing. And they do get married after he's in the Naval Academy, or while he's there, and plays football for the midshipmen, and is 60th in his class of 821, and he has a military. I don't know if he did this for political reasons. Has a military career, but he's obviously just too young to serve in World War II. But he wants to get that military service in there, and gets exposed to nuclear, not like radiation, but he gets, we're developing nuclear energy and weapons, and
that's where he became anti-nuclear weapon, right?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I wonder.
And he does end up going. He goes help clean up a facility that has a bit of a meltdown.
Yeah. Chalk River. He leads the maintenance crew. There's Canadian people on board, so it's like an international effort, and each team member has to put on protective gear and individually is lowered into the reactor for 90 seconds at a time. And he did it. And it's this leads to him helping with the neutron bomb, developing it. So maybe he should have just stayed a nuclear scientist, but he's very good at
against
it.
the neutron bomb. Yeah, so Nonye was right. Yeah.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah, he realized how bad nuclear is.
Yeah.
He's sort of an argument that it doesn't shorten your lifespan. So, yeah, 90 seconds, you're good. Yeah, maybe it made him live longer.
All right. Yeah.
I wonder also, it must have been like Hiroshima, Nagasaki also, right? He probably, knew about that.
Right.
And didn't like that very much, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like most Americans at the time were like, yeah, we had to do it. But I don't know. I wonder if in his later years he was against, he came out against the nuking the Japanese. But he takes over the peanut business, which he's called a peanut farmer. As Rick Perlstein points out, he's more of a peanut warehouser. Like he owns like warehouses, right, where they keep peanuts.
Yeah, he's just a business guy. Yeah, like he's not out there farming the peanuts. Yeah, they own a pretty big business. It's a little bit in debt or something when he takes it over, so he's not inheriting like a hugely profitable business. But of course, he turns it around because he's fiscally responsible, and also Rosalind is really good at that stuff.
Right. Yeah. So it does. They are like kind of scraping by at first. His family. He's a big family, and they're all living check to check, and then they do better. And by 1962, wants to get into politics. He's involved in his church and his community and stuff, and he's like just bored by it, and he wants something more. And there's an open seat in the Georgia State Senate, and he announces 15 days before the election. And the ballot for this actually was a liquor box. I guess the Georgia Board of Elections was a little underfunded or something.
Well, yeah, elections back then were super great. We got in this little with LBJ. Yeah, elections were not too great.
Right. This is before Civil Rights Act's gone into effect, and he does get this election overturned though, because he proves that it's corrupt, and the judge is chewing tobacco in the courtroom and looks at the facts, and Carter convinces them to overturn it, and so he becomes a state senator, and also very bored in the state Senate. He wants something more, he wants power, and he tries running for governor in 1966, and then gets like more religious. How did that affect his?
Yeah, losing is just tough, and I think he loses. He's $66,000 in debt. He's lost 22 pounds, and he just needs something. And he gets born again. He finds Jesus a little better. He's also upset because he lost to this guy Lester Maddox, who's like super racist. He would like wield an axe to keep black people from coming to his chicken restaurant.
Jeez.
So Carter's like, how did I lose to this guy? I need to find Jesus even more than I already did. And at some point he's going door to door, like knocking doors, telling people about Jesus. And then 10 years later, he's president.
Yeah, which is kind of unprecedented in American politics. But he calls himself in a press conference conservative, moderate, liberal, and middle of the road.
True centrist.
Yeah.
But not really. Very conservative.
Sounds like he's trying to get good SEO.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Should put that on my website.
But in 1970, that's really when he, did what we talked about earlier, where he's running as a Dixiecrat, and oddly pretending to be more racist than he turns out to be, or at least governs as. He does his stuff with the Atlanta Hawks, uses the picture of his opponent with the Hawks basketball team.
We got to talk about this a little bit more, though, because we're seeing a lot of this now, too, because let's be real, all the people that are MAGA, I bet a lot of them are pretending to be more racist than they are.
Interesting.
So does that make him non-racist? I feel like you're still racist if you're willing to use that to advance yourself. That's a lot of MAGA politicians. So.
Yeah, I mean, you might as well, I guess it depends on, it's a spectrum, right? I guess of racism. So that's certainly on there if you're willing to.
Yeah, racism is a spectrum. Yeah, it's a spectrum, but it's all one color because they're not too thrilled with the other color.
But yeah,
racism's not a deal breaker for him. Yeah, and that's racist.
And that's racist, exactly. that's exactly what we're seeing now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But he becomes governor, and 6 years. He's elected in 1970, sworn in, I assume it's 1971. So then it's only 5 years later he is elected president. And 3 years before running, he tells his mom he wants to be president, and she says, "President of what?" And nobody is expecting this guy to be a presidential candidate at this point. But he is starting to court celebrity support, musicians, when he's governor of Georgia, and that's what the Rock and Roll President documentary is about on HBO, where he hangs out with the Allman Brothers, Willie Nelson. When he's governor of Georgia, and even before that, he's really interested in what his kids are listening to, and he'll stay in the room and really study it, because he wants to have his finger on the pulse. And then that kind of sort of helps him, because I think he's is preparing for later, because he knows he's going to run for president one day, and if he has all these musicians supporting him, he'll just seem cooler.
Yep.
He even was in touch with Elvis a little bit. I think I saw it somewhere.
Probably, yeah.
Only white artists, though, I guess.
Yeah. But when he's governor, he says time for segregation is over, and makes a lot of the Dixiecrats in Georgia very mad.
And he gets on the cover of Time magazine for that.
Mm-hmm.
But then I did find hypocrisy, because then 2 years later he's doing George Wallace Day, or he shows up at that in 72. So he's still kind of going back and forth.
And and the Confederate iconography is very much a part of his whole deal. And he's also making cameos, and I think this is just the same celebrity logic thing. When Hank Aaron is on the home run chase for the Atlanta Braves, Jimmy makes sure he's in the stands for that and is present. And goes on What's My Line, which is a game show at the time. I assume where you guess a celebrity and nobody knows who he is.
Yeah.
So he's a long way to go in the early 70s. He reduces the number of state agencies in Arkansas, merges about 300 into 22. It's not clear how much money to save the state, but I wonder how much that, because that sort of corrupt good old boy system, I wonder if that was a big part of what he was attacking, just all this massive corruption in state government, or if it was just
corruption guy.
Yeah,
but he also doesn't really care if the other people in government like him, and that helps you get rid of corruption.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the big split in the Democratic Party at this point is New Deal, Great Society era people who are for helping the poor and indigent, and spending a lot of money, but also are just blatantly corrupt. And then you have this new crop that's against corruption, they want to clean up government, but they also don't necessarily think it can be used as a tool to help people in a material way in the same sense. But he says of his time as governor, I spent more time on my knees as governor than the whole rest of my life, which I don't know what he means by that.
I mean, there's one thing we can take. Talk about the gawk, right? Maybe.
Yeah.
That's how he got those agencies. Yeah, he had it. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
He do a lot to people to give their agencies. Yeah.
I do wanna circle back a little bit to, you saying the people that wanted to get rid of corruption but didn't think government was the way to help the poor. Those people just didn't want to help black people, right? They just didn't want to help non-whites. Let's be real. That's really what that was.
There's a lot, but also the other people also didn't want to help black people, Richard Daley.
Yeah. It was an interesting time.
Yeah.
It was an interesting time.
Yeah.
I mean, we're living through another time that's very similar right now. It's just most places have been desegregated, I feel like is the only difference.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of logic was okay, well, there's, millions of black people in these states that now get to vote, and we kind of have to do stuff for them. A little bit.
A little.
Yeah, there was a lot of okay, well, the public school's integrated, so all the white people go to a rich private school, and then they make the public school pretty crappy.
Right.
Yep. Still going on.
Yeah. But he's a big penny pincher, and he's he tries to, motivate the people of Georgia to help him as governor. And he's kind of a precursor to him being president. He alienates most of the state assembly with a government reorganization bill, but he does get it passed because he's very determined. And so he's able to use his will to do stuff as governor of Georgia, despite, the political class hating him. But that's the state of Georgia. It's not the United States of America, which is a much taller order to be one man against the odds.
Yeah, like Georgia's more one-party rule too.
Yeah, right. And he has Amy Carter at a certain point, and she's
like, they had 3 sons. They take a family poll. Should we have try for a daughter? And then they get a daughter, and it's a cute redheaded girl.
That's crazy.
It's perfect.
You guys must love that. Wow.
Yeah.
That's your favorite part of the story.
Yeah.
Well, she's like quintessential redhead because she's mocked in the media for, unfairly. She's a very shy, sort of reserved person, but she's called ugly and a ginger. And so she's kind of, I think to this day, she doesn't do any interviews. Sort of similar to Chelsea. I mean, there's a lot of similarities. I'm realizing even.
I hope they're friends.
Yeah.
Amy does have a dog who's named Grit, and that's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Grit.
Oh, that's a good name. Yeah.
But that's so crazy that you would take a poll of your kids and be like, "Do you want a brother or a sister?" And then think that. I mean, it worked out, but you think you're actually deciding that. Yeah.
That just added to his mental illness of thinking that he was godlike.
Yeah.
But you got to think about it though, all these people that become president, there must be the perfect sequence of events in their life that make them think, I'm destined for greatness. They all have to have it.
Right. And the 70s, it was really the perfect time, as we said, for him because, early 70s, Nixon's in power. Someone like Jimmy Carter would be laughed out of the room. And then Watergate happens, and all of a sudden there's a yearning for someone like Jimmy Carter, who's just
Vietnam War and all that.
Some more let's get back to innocence and just a clean bill of no scandals, a reformer, and someone who's religious and takes it seriously. Nixon was a Quaker, but clearly didn't obey the edicts.
Quakers are not supposed to bomb people. It's an anti-war part of Christianity.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's not. He's not too religious. Yeah, and Carter's good because as a governor, no connection to D.C., which is corrupt, and also no foreign policy experience to knock down. So he could say whatever he wants, kind of like Obama back in when he ran in 2008.
Yeah. So he starts running for president in December 1974, which is pretty early. And he treats it, he's, again, kind of one of the first religious figures to be president. And there's a lot of skills that you learn being a door-to-door missionary and a preacher that do translate to politics. So he announces, the first person to announce goes 50,000 miles around the country and visits 37 states before anyone else has even announced. And it's funny, this, again, really only worked one time, and you see politicians to this day trying to ape this thing where it's like, well, if I just am really early and I go everywhere before anyone else that people have actually heard of bow in, then I'm going to have an advantage, and this really just worked one time.
Well, it kind of worked for Obama, because I remember being in college, way before, I'm not going to say my age, but my freshman year of college, I was at Seton Hall, which is a UN school, and everybody was talking about Obama already. My freshman year. So he was another person like that, where he was visiting all these universities.
Yeah.
There was buzz about him.
Right.
Well before he announced.
That's true, but he was kind of a national figure because of the 2004 DNC speech.
That's
whereas
true.
Carter was like, nobody had heard of him at all.
Yeah. So I will tell you when I got. So I was a freshman in 2003, 2004. So
Okay.
Yeah.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have guessed it.
Yeah, I'm old. Yeah, my freshman year, LeBron was in Sports Illustrated. We finally heard from him. He
I
like a
was
junior.
young.
Yeah.
I was young for a freshman, though. I wasn't like the normal age.
Okay.
I will say that.
My freshman year, Jimmy Carter was elected president. So
Wow.
No.
You look great. That's so crazy.
no, I was I'm actually when Trump was elected, I was a freshman. This 2 months ago. So
okay, wow.
I'm 18.
So yeah.
Yeah, so he announces at a National Press Club speech, and he's talks about inequality. It's not really an issue he tackles as president, but the theme is optimism, and we can change this country.
So it's the same thing as hope and change, optimism and change.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. But his opponents just say Jimmy who, and he starts to have a adage in response. He says, "My name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president."
The impression is like dead on. Are you good?
Oh, thank
Comment
you.
on that? It's pretty good.
Thank you.
Oh, Anders is good at impressions. Yeah, I also am so bad I don't even attempt them. So yeah, I'm used to it. He has to do every impression until we do Bernie. Then I'll probably do Bernie.
Okay,
Yeah. I
yeah.
can see you doing Bernie.
Yeah.
I think you'd be good.
Yeah. But he publishes a memoir in June of 75. It's called Why Not the Best, which is a bit of a, okay, buddy.
Sounds like something Kanye would write.
Yeah.
Why not the best?
All right.
They do have a weak field, the Democrats in 76. There's no really good candidates because Humphrey is too old to run or is like too cancer stricken. Ted decides not to run because Watergate like reminds people of like scandals and he's a scandal guy.
And it's Chappaquiddick because happened not that long ago.
Yeah. So it's like because who's the strong person? Who does Jimmy even beat?
Right.
Birch Bayh? Like come
Scoop
on,
Jackson, I think is in the polls, who I can't wait to do an episode about because he's like liberal neocon, but he's leading, but he's weird.
Yeah. George Wallace's third run, and he's like, it's like okay, maybe you'll win Florida, but come on.
Well, there was Frank Church.
Oh yeah.
This is what I've seen because we did the episode on Fred Harris, who was a very progressive candidate at this time, but he was kind of like seen as too out there for some people. But Frank Church has just totally reformed the CIA. Well, I mean, reformed, but he did actually do these hearings where for the first time the CIA had to explain itself and there were changes made. And he was also like a economically progressive. So he may have been the guy who Jimmy was able to supplant mostly because he was an outsider. And
Jimmy just starts way ahead. And Church, I think, has like issues with funding because like by starting early, you're able to get the match funding more quickly. There's all kinds of things, but it was a good election to start early. And Church is actually super late that he gets in.
Right. And this is kind of a new thing in 1976 that it becomes from Jimmy Carter, the Iowa caucus. People didn't really people didn't care about it.
He really was a trendsetter.
Yeah,
honestly,
he was.
Some of the trends he started, we should leave them alone.
Exactly.
But he was a trendsetter.
No, it's true. Yeah, he was way ahead of his time in many good and bad ways.
Yeah, the double speak alone during his presidency.
Yeah, they said that he couldn't put him on Mount Rushmore because he had too many. He would need two faces on there.
Yeah.
I think that was mostly about his abortion position, but he does it. He says other things like that later.
Yeah. Was he like? So I feel like with Nixon then him, those are back-to-back examples of what every president has been like since. Honestly.
Sure. I mean, you have Ford in there in the middle, who's like I think the only president to never be elected president or vice president.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. So people are just kind of like.
Honestly, I forgot about him right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right.
Very forgetful guy.
It's not an election winner, so.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Never won a well, I guess he would maybe count for us. We'll have to do him at some point. But ran a very good.
No, he's very Vanquished, and the Reagan primary. Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ford's going to be great. Also, he has a responsibility for MLMs that we got to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as we're about to get to, he actually had a very good campaign, all things considered, because as Josh pointed out in the Mitt Romney episode, he was like way behind when it started, and he was able to get up there and then for a second lead, and then Jimmy won. But Carter just is all across Iowa. He's obsessed with Iowa, and that continues into his presidency. He has an Iowa obsession. He will call up truck drivers who he met during the 76, like leading up to the caucus, and just check in on them while he's president of the United States. Wow. He is obsessed with Iowa, and he's sleeping on people's couches, and that endears him to people who are participating in this caucus. And he'll say things like, "We need a government as full of love as the American people." Just platitudes.
Which American people?
Yeah.
That's never been the case.
Right.
Specifically the people in Iowa. Yeah, he wins some white states, but then New Hampshire's next.
Right. But he wins, and it's everyone's shocked. They don't know who this guy is, and barely even know what the Iowa caucus is. But there's not a clear front runner, and all of a sudden this guy has won the first state, and so he dominates the first media cycle, and he gets a lot of support from the elite media, people in the elite sector of the mass communications media. He's a kind of like Trump. People want to hear about him because they're interested in this curious phenomenon, and that ends up gaining him some favorable coverage. And he shoots to the top of the polls, and he knocks every door. It's said that he probably knocked on every single door for Democratic voters in the state of New Hampshire. So he's really doing and that's a big advantage, is the other people think that stuff is beneath them, and he's actually doing the dirty work and knocking on doors and stuff. And after New Hampshire, it's clear that this guy's going to be the nominee.
Yeah, and he is. Yeah, there is one thing where he is still saying racist things. Yeah, he says, "I have nothing against a community that's trying to maintain the ethnic purity of their neighborhoods," which is supposedly pro open housing laws, but specifically it's not integrating neighborhoods.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. And he gets a little bit more establishment after he becomes the front runner. And he's kind of trying to be everything to everyone. Like that good is the American people line. He says that, but about when he's asked about foreign policy, what is your foreign policy? Well, it's going to be good as the American people. It's not really an answer, but in 1976, that's what people want to hear.
Oh, yeah.
He's Mr. Sorry,
I was going to say, doesn't that remind you of the mayor, the mayor right now?
Oh, yeah, Eric Adams. Yeah,
Eric Adams. He's always like, "Oh, I love Istanbul. Istanbul is the New York of Turkey. Oh, I love Paris. Paris is the New York of France." I just feel like the repetitive nature of just very stupid phrasing has stayed, since Carter. It probably existed before that too, though.
Right, but no, he's very good at the slogan and branding, and
Yeah, but he's got 70% approval, but then they say his approval is a mile wide and an inch deep, so it's going to fall apart at different points.
Like his dick. Oh, sorry.
Which actually, no, that is that's kind of what happens, because he gives an interview to Playboy, and he says you know what? I have cheated on my wife in my heart, which he thinks is going to be this really truthful, sort of relatable and admirable thing to confess. But his base at that time, a large chunk of it, is evangelical.
Yeah.
Because they haven't all gone over the Republicans yet, and they aren't as polarized about abortion necessarily. And so they just want someone like them. And if he's a Democrat, that's cool. But he's talking about cheating on his wife, and he's giving an interview to Playboy. Yeah. All of a sudden they're like, well, I guess we'll vote for Ford.
That is a type of cheating, though, where you're overly flirty with other people and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't believe in any of that, though.
Yeah.
Everybody should be free,
Free to flirt. Yeah. I think it's, I don't know how to do it, so I'm in the clear.
Not the two flirtiest guys.
Honestly, I'm not very flirty too. People think I'm flirting just because I look a certain way, but I'm like, I'm having a OCD. I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm just trying to get you to like me.
Yeah, right. Is just needing to be liked by everybody? Is that considered flirting?
Our flirting is do you know who Fred Harris was?
Yeah.
He was amazing. We did the first ever podcast about him.
But
time recently when I tried to flirt, I was like actually actively trying to flirt with someone. I said like the dumbest thing. I was like, oh, like I've been studying Chinese. No one cares about that. No one cares what I'm studying. But I feel like that's like, I don't know. Anyway,
were you talking to a Chinese person?
Yeah, that's the thing. Is it matters if they're Chinese?
He was.
Oh, okay.
He was Chinese.
I think that's flirty to say.
You can do that.
It's a little racist though, too, isn't it?
If a white guy does it, it's creepy. If you do it, it's okay. Yeah.
If he doesn't speak Chinese, that might be problematic.
I said specifically Mandarin, and in New York, most people speak Cantonese.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Yeah, like I feel like it was. I feel like it was.
So he's like
construed as racism.
Okay.
Or just trying to flirt. So, there you go. So
next time you got to flirt in Cantonese, I guess.
Yeah, I got flirt in Cantonese. Exactly.
But a big this is another trend that he sets is when he's deciding a vice president. You know, before this, it's just kind of like decided at the convention, and somebody's just kind of like pushed on you. You barely have any say in it. But he really takes his time to interview a short list of guys and figure out who he is the most like simpatico with, and his like strain of baptism, right? He's a Baptist.
Yeah, he's Baptist. Yeah, he does even brag that like Baptists are big on separation of church and state.
Yeah,
and that's a good thing for him, even though because he's the most religious president in a while.
Right. There is just although Mondale is not Lutheran, I'm pretty sure he's another, but he's Scandinavian and from Minnesota, and there's just a lot of like similar vibes to sort of Carter's brand of like prudence and just, you know, Scandinavian culture really. And so they have a mind meld, and they hang out in planes and just fall in love with each other.
Talking shit about the Pope, probably.
Yeah. And they're like, oh my God, you're so modest. No, you're so modest. And they become another OTP, Fritz and Jimmy. And so Mondale becomes the VP nominee. And he is different from Carter in that he is like a great society liberal who, you know, comes out of the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, Minnesota, and is big on social programs. And so he does, over Carter's presidency, have to like make some, you know, come to terms with Carter having different politics. But at the convention, Carter gives a speech where he quotes Bob Dylan. He says, "We have an America that, in Bob Dylan's phrase, is busy being born, not busy dying." And you know, it signals to the youth that he's with it and cool, even in 1976. Which I guess, you know, that song was like a decade old at that point, but it's still like. You know, people who were chuggy at that point liked it.
I feel like you could quote Bob Dylan now and still get young people be like, "Wow!"
Oh yeah, that's
which is
good news to me.
Kind of sad, but it is the case. Well, young whites.
Yeah, fair enough.
To me, it would be like, okay, if you quoted, I don't know, Donna Summer or something.
Oh, okay.
Maybe I'd be like, oh, that's kind of interesting, but it wouldn't get me to vote for you.
All right, fair enough.
A little dumb for voting for those reasons. It's like having Megan Thee Stallion at your event, you know.
Oh,
it's not
yeah.
gonna get anybody really.
Yeah.
Guess it worked back then.
Right. So he's up against Ford, who's, you know, incumbent president. He's challenged by Reagan that year, and does a Playboy interview, and that again almost totally derails the campaign. The interviewer is actually Robert Scheer, who's a guy who's still around. He's like a left-wing media dude. We could probably get him on the show if maybe. I don't want to promise anything, but he's a great journalist and did interviews for Playboy in the 70s, and asks him about pride, and he says the thing about lusting after women and committing adultery in his heart. And then he also says in a different interview that he doesn't care if people say the word fuck, because at that point, that's, you know, we're not that far removed from a time where you weren't allowed to say the word toilet on TV. And so presidential candidate condoning, or at least saying he's apathetic towards swearing, is just gets a lot of scrutiny. And
that's weird, because in the general malaise speech, he's going to come out against cursing. So he is going to flip-flop on this. Yeah, he says we need to curse less. Yeah.
I mean, he was a famous flip-flopper.
Yeah.
So, that all tracks.
Yeah. But he turns it around in the debates with Ford.
Do you want me to highlight the gap? Yeah, Ford makes a gaffe, basically.
Yes. Yeah, this is a big gaffe.
Ford says that the Eastern Europe is not under Soviet domination.
Right.
And then there's even a video of Carter kind of laughing, and it stops Ford's momentum, and he's not able to close the gap, so Carter is able to win a narrow race. And in the Ford episode, we're going to get deep into that.
Right. Yeah, as Carter points out, Ford basically says Poland is not like controlled by the Soviets, or the Soviets don't have an interest in that, and Carter's like, well, that's probably news to a lot of the Polish Americans watching this. Oddly, Carter still does not win Illinois even after that line, but a lot of Polish people in other places like Ohio who get mad at Ford. 1976, turnout's pretty low. It's only 55%, and as Pearlstein says, the public felt nibbled to death by ducks. And
rather than being addressed by giants.
Yeah. So that just means like little issues and not dealing with.
These are not great men. Yeah. And Ford and Carter is like the two, like they're forgettable. Yeah. Like I know you forgot about Ford. Yeah. Ford is the Millard Fillmore of the 20th century. And if you don't know if Millard Fillmore was president, go look it up. I won't tell you.
Yeah, and he is able to win, and this is kind of the key to his success, is he wins the South and is a Democrat, so he's also able to win places like New York, but it's kind of an odd electoral map that isn't really recreated. Somewhat in the 90s, a little bit, Clinton's able to win some of these states, but... yeah, it's 1976, kind of a flash in the pan.
It sort of looks like an East-West Civil War is about to break out, but it doesn't quite end up happening.
So to me, like, this makes a lot of sense for what was going on at the time, though. Like, because if you know what's going on with, civil rights and everything, that makes sense. That those are the states that he would win.
Yeah, he wins the Solid South, and then enough blue North states.
Yeah,
New York's one of the biggest states at the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
He said, and he actually commends Ford on something. You would think this issue would be a gimme, because a lot of people are mad at Ford for pardoning Nixon, but Carter says that's like a good thing that helped heal the country, which is kind of shooting himself in the foot there. So he becomes president, and he's immediately very popular for several months. He's at like 70% approval rating. Yeah.
Does that ever happen after this ever again?
It's a good Bush, I guess. What?
Yeah, Bush.
I mean, after 9/11.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
Before 9/11, right? Before 9/11, he was pretty low. But
yeah, I think starting with Obama, no one's gotten there. Yeah, Bush is another one like Carter, where he goes all the way up and all the way down.
Yeah,
and then since Obama, there's been like a solid amount of people who hate the president at any time.
Obama had like a month right before the Tea Party started, and where it was pretty high, I think. Yeah. But yeah, this is a real fun aspect to Jimmy Carter is Billy Carter. It was actually the name of a friend of mine, in my old neighborhood as a kid. But Billy was they did not have the same sort of interests and passions as Jimmy, shall we say.
Oh, yeah. He's a gas station owner. He's described as redneck chic. He says funny lines sometimes, like, my mom went into the Peace Corps when she was 68. My one sister's a motorcycle freak. My other sister is a holy roller evangelist. My brother's running for president. I'm the only sane one in the family. He's got his own beer. He's got gas stations. He's doing corrupt things somehow with Libya. And even he's spouting a little anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Yeah, he's got a little everything, Billy.
Yeah. As you said, he kind of has Hunter Biden vibes.
Hunter Biden doesn't really say anything.
Right. Right. It's like if Hunter.
It's like Meghan Markle's family. That's what I'm getting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like if Hunter Biden were saying controversial things all the time.
He just smokes crack.
Yeah.
And buys weapons. That's all he does.
Yeah. Billy only sounded like he was on crack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Might have been. It was getting close to crack's heyday over there. So
there was probably really good coke in the 70s. Billy definitely, would have sampled
Angel
it.
Dust, all those things. Preludes were so popular.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But this is, I think, the real tragedy of Jimmy Carter's presidency is he has a Democratic House, I believe a Democratic Senate, if I'm not mistaken.
I would think so.
Yeah, and if
they got
not,
the South still.
right, and you also have like liberal Republicans, so you have the votes to continue the Great Society, the New Deal, maybe a third installation of that, because for, since 1969, you haven't had a Democratic president, but Nixon was forced to pass a lot of very progressive stuff because that coalition was still intact and very powerful. And now you have an opportunity to make it, even more vigorous and bold, which he's sort of campaigned on. He's like, this issue or that issue, he's like, yeah, I support national health insurance, stuff like that. But his priority is not those things, and he is going up against the Democratic Party, which still wants to have a welfare state, and he is, again, ahead of his time in what proves to be, I think, a bad way, is that he's an austerian. He doesn't think the government should, be that involved in the economy to the degree that Johnson or Roosevelt did. And there aren't that many Democrats like this at this point. So people are like, what's going on? And interpersonally, he's just has a different sensibility from people like Tip O'Neill, who's the Speaker of the House, Democrat from Boston. And a lot of people blame their relationship for being sour and the problems of his presidency. But as one of Carter's friends said, if you had given him a personality transplant, you would have had the same issues. If he was like the nicest guy in the world, they're still just at loggerheads ideologically. He doesn't want to do bold economic things. He's a conservative Democrat, and that's really the source of tension with his own party.
Welfare reform. He'd rather do welfare reform than health care, which is crazy because Nixon had even tried a little bit of health care and worked with Ted Kennedy on it. And then Carter's like, no, I don't. Nixon's the last Republican president to try to do health care, probably the only. And then Carter's like, I don't even want. I'm going to do welfare reform. He's very big on this energy bill, and just like we can't be dependent on foreign oil. And like for regular people, your prices will go up, and you should use less energy, and that you better like it.
Yeah, and he's. This is something a lot of people repeat about him is if you're an advisor or you're advising Carter, and you say this is good for you politically, he will just stop listening to you. So he's, again, has this very messianic sort of attitude about just being president and life in general. There's a thing in Reagan land, there's a passage where he has, which oddly enough, it's called Reagan land. It's like mostly about Jimmy Carter's presidency.
Yeah, I remember reading him like, when is Reagan going to become president? It's a humongous book. It's Rick Rosen. It's amazing. It ends with Reagan winning.
Right.
So it's not about Reagan presidency at all. It's about Jimmy Carter's presidency and how the Republicans kick his ass. Right. And bring a conservative era in.
Yeah. But towards the beginning, he gets into office and he just sits down and goes through all the like federal funded engineering programs in America, because he's an engineer, and he determines like a bunch of them aren't necessary, and he just like hasn't told the cabinet secretary or person in charge of that he's going to do all this stuff, and they're like, wait, what? So he's just like going at things alone and not really, building coalitions inside government, and is just very iconoclastic and stubborn, and also, but seen as very sort of confused and like not focused.
He does have a little bit of Ross Perot in him. He's Southern. He owns a business. He wants to run the government like a business, balance the budget, all that kind of stuff. And it's not too practical, and especially that he just doesn't care if Congress likes him, and he's willing to treat Congress of his own party adversarially.
Yeah. And he does get remembered as the inflation president. Inflation's really bad. In all fairness, though, inflation had been a problem before that, right? I mean, Nixon.
Yeah, that's usually coming from the previous president.
Yeah.
When there's inflation during your.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is, we just spent so much money bombing Vietnam. We took America off the gold standard. And the thing was, like, the post-war boom was real from 49 to 73. Like, people's incomes doubled, like real incomes, and then it just isn't increasing the same way. We're not getting more productive. We're not increasing our incomes. It might have been productivity, not the incomes. And it's just and they're like, we don't know how to solve this. And it's like people are ready to just start fighting over slices of the pie. And Carter's like, well, you'll just use a little less, you'll be fine. And Reagan's like, no, things are going to be great, but secretly he's going to let rich people steal from you.
Yep.
Yeah. Stagflation and unemployment is going down to.
It's at 9 and it goes down to 5, but then it's going to go back up by towards the end of his presidency.
Yeah, and it really just there's some interesting misconceptions though about inflation that come out of this presidency, even though they're aware of the fact that government spending does not necessarily create inflation. They have the attitude that we still have to treat it like it does, and they say these cuts aren't necessarily going to help inflation, but they are symbolic, and it'll like get everybody on the same page. Yeah, so he's just slashing budgets. You have people like Mondale who are like, sir, we don't have to do this. We can leave if you just leave a few billion here, a few billion there, and through these programs, that's going to help people survive. Yeah. And he's just like, sorry, I have to do it, because he's reading theology. Ronald Reagan, who's a theologian, who's basically saying, life is all about hard choices and leadership. You have to make trade-offs, and this is just totally alien to the rest of. Did he never
study economics? Does he not realize that when there's money in these social programs, there's more hires and people are working, and there's money. Like there's money for people.
Yeah, I don't know what economics knowledge he has. Yeah,
he must not have studied any economics.
I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure he studied microeconomics.
yeah.
But he
peanut economics.
To him, it's like a moral thing. Like there's something wrong morally with getting a handout and stuff like that. Then it was just a very conservative ideology, but he's like still kind of a conservative Democrat at this
We've
point.
actually had very few religious presidents.
Yeah.
It is him and George W., and they both kind of make some crazy decisions. And most of the presidents were not that religious. Even back to Washington, it was basically an agnostic.
Yeah, but they use religion. They all know how to use it to their benefit.
But Carter seems to really believe in it.
Yeah.
Like he was surprised when he didn't go to heaven.
He's finding that out right now as we speak. And there's. So were you going to say something?
Oh, yeah, there is a thing with inflation. It's like, if you make more, it's fine. If you're an average person, inflation hurts the people who hold people's debt. It actually always hurts rich people more. And Perlstein kind of explains that a good amount.
Right.
And that's why the rich people care about it a lot. And it was still a problem today, under Biden.
Yeah. But it's interesting. He's like making all these enemies in Washington and making weird decisions and stuff. But it takes till like June for his approval rating to go down. And that happens with the Burt Lance scandal, who is Burt Lance and what happened here?
I forget what his exact job. He
was like chief of staff or something.
Yeah. He's in charge of getting the legislation done, and he had financial things in Georgia, and like he was just trying to keep some kind of scheme afloat, and like he would promise the same stock as collateral to two different people, and it all gets caught, and then Jimmy's like, hears him out, and he's like, I think this guy's, all right, I'm proud of you, Bert, he even says, and he's like ready to fight it, and it's like by fighting it, he costs himself the approval, and at that, he loses approval, and he's never able to kind of set the agenda again. The agenda is always set for him the rest of his presidency.
Yeah. And he loses credibility because he's the anti-corruption guy. You may not agree with everything he's doing, but he's the moral figure who's fighting the good fight and wants to clean up government. And then he has this, and he can never really regain trust and credibility.
Isn't that amazing that back then that actually mattered to the voters? Now it's like we have the most corrupt presidents of all time.
Yeah.
Like Trump just got elected again, and
it is, yeah.
That's insane. Wow.
Yeah, they always said Jimmy Carter had put his peanut farm or whatever in a trust, and then Trump doesn't even pretend to do that.
Yeah. And then meanwhile, you have Reagan waiting in the wings. He has, I think, somewhat deliberately not gone to bat for Ford in 1976 because he knows what's going to happen, and he knows his best shot is for Ford to lose to Carter and then him to do what he did, which is come back in 1980. So he's creating PACs and is doing all this behind-the-scenes stuff.
And I will say, if Ford to Reagan is kind of like Romney to Trump.
Right.
Kind of a similar thing where, like Ford is just like in the middle of the party, kind of boring. And then Reagan's coming out there and lying to you.
Right.
Making it sound believable. And, just an amazing acting performance.
Yeah.
Much better than he had on the screen because he was a B-movie actor, and his B-movies are still playing while late night while he's running for president.
And Carter's like losing all of his coalition is coming apart. Evangelicals all of a sudden are like, wait, this guy's a Democrat. And so I guess there's gay people in his coalition too. And Carter has a gay event at the White House. I assume the first president to do something like that.
I mean, probably, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think it's the first. Yeah, Nixon wasn't doing that.
Yeah.
And Carter's not even there. It's like an official, a staff member does it. He's trying to really thread the needle, but it doesn't work.
Right.
And the religious right is ready to become a big thing.
Yeah. Even though he's still, as president, teaching Sunday school, they leave him in droves. And
The Sunday school thing's funny because he's teaching it, and he keeps having to read passages that say the Jews killed Jesus. And then the Jewish groups would complain, and then he does it again, and like he just keeps getting in trouble, and he has to I think he has to stop teaching the Sunday school because of that. And he is big on the energy bill. He says it's the moral equivalent of war, this energy bill. And, of course, then people realize that stands for meow. And that helps submarine him.
Yeah. He also, this is I think a mostly good part of his legacy. Early on, he negotiates the Panama Canal Treaty, which the canal is controlled by America, and there's the Panama Canal Zone, which is like where Americans live. And he says, well, it's time to give it back to Panama. Let them have control over their own territory. However, it's negotiated in the 70s, and then it doesn't go into effect until the year 2000, I think.
Yeah.
So he's like, I won't be alive.
Yeah. But interestingly, John Wayne, who hates Carter, is like a ravenous Republican.
Yeah, he hated indigenous people. He was racist. He was an awful person.
Yeah. But he has a house in Panama, and for whatever reason, he thinks that we should give it back to the Panamanians and helps Carter pass this treaty. But it makes people like Reagan just furious.
Yeah, it was an old school Reagan thing, and now Trump is kind of talking about it because Trump has to copy Reagan. And Reagan would
he did talk about that.
Reagan would like wear a Panama hat, and he's like, I bought it, I paid for it, it's mine. And that's what they're saying about the canal. And Trump is going to make the canal American again. He's been talking about it.
Oh, man.
Hopefully not.
So in 1978, lowers the capital gains tax, starts deregulating stuff, and vetoes a public works bill. He's called by George Meany, the AFL-CIO president, the most conservative president since Coolidge, which is the Carter administration likes this because it makes them look conservative, and that's what they want. Oddly,
that's a huge nerd. It's like Hoover is the guy you think of, but Hoover did try a few things. So saying Coolidge is like such a burn.
Yeah,
if you're a nerd, and Jimmy Carter is a nerd.
And but to me, I'm kind of like this quote because it's kind of George Meany getting his comeuppance, because this is like, he's a very conservative AFL-CIO secretary, and he opposed George McGovern, and look what happened. Now you have now you got what you wanted initially as a more conservative Democrat, and your members are hurting from it.
Yeah, that's well said. It is a problem for Carter. Carter's from Georgia. He's a business owner. He's not a worker. There's no unions in Georgia. And he's a Democratic leader with no connection to unions, and that really hurts him.
Right. And he isn't able to really do the Clinton thing of like, okay, I'll go to the Republicans and pass things with them because they don't like him. They think he's a phony.
It's very Biden, right? Because Biden, he skewed conservative, and it hurt him.
Yeah.
But people that know about Biden's history, we weren't surprised by that.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And meanwhile, Ted Kennedy, also kind of waiting in the wings. He gives a speech at the 1978 midterm convention.
Which is the thing they never did. They have a convention in the midterms for no reason.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the Democratic Party is kind of like in crisis now. It's like we caught the car, and now the dog is acting like a Republican. We don't know what to do. And, you know, meanwhile, you have like the new right, which is really ideologically motivated about deregulation, and Carter is deregulating stuff like we were talking about the airlines earlier, which this is simultaneously the reason for a lot of problems we have today with air travel, but also, as you were saying, there was a reason for it, which was that air travel was like prohibitively expensive before.
Yeah, they couldn't lower the rates. They would make it fancier and fancier, but almost no one could afford to fly. Like only a quarter of people had flown. And Ted Kennedy, who's pretty liberal, is saying like, people are like, well, why do you care about airplane travel? I'd never flown. He's like, the reason I care about it is because you've never been able to fly, and I'm going to make it so you could fly.
Yeah.
But of course, now we're in the land of basic economy, and it's just horrible.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And
Boeing just building planes out of like toothpicks and tinfoil,
right,
letting people die. Yeah. It's not great.
Well, it's an interesting time where it's like kind of the focus for the left in a lot of ways is going away from the worker to the consumer, and you know we should use that as kind of the locus of political activity.
Yeah, that's the big thing is when you deregulate, the consumer pays less, but every industry they deregulated, the workers' pay went down.
Right.
Yeah.
So it wasn't costing the elites that much.
Yeah. And there's Humphrey Hawkins, which we talked about in the Humphrey episode, which there was going to be this really bold proposal that was going to guarantee full employment. And it does pass, but Carter waters it down so much that it, was basically just a symbolic thing. And there's a scene in Reaganland where Stevie Wonder is at the White House. It is just straight up calling bullshit on, like, there's a ceremony for Humphrey Hawkins to get it passed, and Stevie Wonder is like, yeah, and make it better because this current thing is pathetic, like, while he's playing the piano.
Yeah, Humphrey Hawkins, because basically Obama, when they're saying, well, why don't you make health insurance national? And he's like, well, that'll cost a lot of jobs. We can't have health. We need people to work in these horrible healthcare jobs, these healthcare insurance jobs. And the truth is, like, if we had a jobs guarantee, those people would get government jobs helping people do something else that we need. Yeah.
Right.
So it really could have gone together. They could have passed the jobs guarantee and universal health care, and instead he gets neither done. And we never had they never really had a chance to do both.
Right. So a big thing Carter's remembered for is the malaise speech, which has some misconceptions, right? Like, because there's an earlier speech.
Malaise, yeah.
Right, and he's not wearing a sweater, right?
Yeah, at some point he's wearing cardigans in the White House, but he's like, you got to turn the thermostat down. I did it in the White House. I'm wearing a cardigan.
Yeah, which was a popular speech. It was earlier on in his presidency, and I think that speech was popular because he was still...
Yeah, that's like a couple weeks in, yeah. The malaise speech, he doesn't say malaise, and it's actually popular. He actually finds the right message, which is like, this is important for like our health, this energy stuff, and we should, like, he gives like a sermon, and everyone's like, this was actually good because he had disappeared for a few days and no one knew what he was going to say. And so he nails it, but then he asks his cabinet to resign, and he fires like 5 cabinet people, and people are like, what the hell is this guy doing? And he never really recovers from that. And it's even crazy because Mondale finds out about it like while he's traveling, and he's like pissed, and he almost becomes the first VP to resign.
Wow.
Mondale's, that upset. And it's just crazy. It's like Andrew Jackson had a VP that he wanted to shoot, and that guy didn't resign. Calhoun, future episode. But it would have been crazy if Mondale was the first guy to leave.
Yeah. So he, it also is warned to not come across as too puritanical by a young Bill Clinton, which kind of sparks, because they're very similar in a lot of ways. They're kind of coming up around the same time, and that sort of begins a long-standing beef between those two guys.
Yeah, Bill Clinton finds a better way to package the politics. Also, Jimmy Carter is liberal on foreign policy, and Bill Clinton is like, I don't need to be liberal on foreign policy either.
I mean, was he?
Yeah.
You guys would say. Me, as someone who is from a foreign family, I would not say that.
Well, yeah. I mean, liberal in not necessarily a good way.
There are millions of deaths that were because of his policies, but that's fine. But go ahead.
Well, maybe just a little more liberal than Nixon, but it's not good. Yeah, we got to get into Afghanistan.
Like lowercase liberal, where it's like
almost like an Obama, where it's like But honestly, during Obama, like, less people died by a lot.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
but you guys can continue.
The hostage situation, also something he's remembered for, which not totally his fault, but there's a long history here. Iran, there's a coup that the CIA undertook in 1953, and you had this government that was pro-U.S., and then it gets overthrown, and long story short, there's hostages in the American
Let me
embassy.
say one thing before he gets overthrown is Carter goes there and he toasts the shine. He's like, this guy's like, what do you call it? This guy's like an island of like stability in like a sea of the Middle East of not being stable. And the minute he leaves, the revolution starts.
Yeah. Which doesn't make him look good either.
Because he backs militants, and he likes doing that. But
Yeah.
but that's just American presidents.
Right.
Destabilizing other countries is good for them.
Yeah. And, Carter, so he is remembered as, and I think maybe I'll say he's like maybe the least worst of post-war presidents on foreign policy. However, as Noam Chomsky often says, if you apply the Nuremberg standards to every post-war president, all of them would be hung. And he's often asked, well, what about Jimmy Carter? He's like this nice guy. And as he points out, he was like sending arms to Indonesia, where they're committing war crimes. But as Carter likes to say, we never fired a bullet during his presidency. I don't know how true that is, because there is at least an attempt to go into Iran and to rescue the hostages.
Yeah, there's no bullets. It's like a helicopter crash that kills 8 people.
Yeah. And
It's so interesting, though, because, okay, you yourself didn't, but you're giving money to all these militias in Africa and the Middle East and South Asia. So it's like you yourself may tell the American people we're not involved in any wars right now, but it was back when I feel like the American people were, maybe they had fatigue from Vietnam, so they weren't paying attention as much.
Right.
So maybe they did believe it at the time. You can look back now and you did have your hands in a lot of destabilization.
Yeah.
In the world.
And Americans weren't going to die anywhere, so it didn't resonate with people that, there was imperialism.
They're going to sell arms and enforce.
Right.
Yeah, the effect of the hostages and then Afghanistan, people then want to beef up the military, which then plays into Reagan's hand. He's Mr. Beef of the military.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. In Afghanistan, you also have the Soviets who are. They said that they invaded Afghanistan. They were invited to come to Afghanistan and fight off theocrats, essentially, from taking over Afghanistan, because Afghanistan had a democratic communist government, and the Soviets were helping them. But that's seen as this act of aggression, and Carter has just, started to negotiate with the Soviets, so that blows up in his face too. So it's just things are looking real chaotic, and in steps Reagan. But before he becomes the nominee, of course, Ted Kennedy challenges Carter. We did a whole episode about that. It is I find that campaign really fascinating. But Reagan, of course, wins. We don't have time to totally go into the 1980 election, which is what I wanted to talk about. We'll do another recapping that. But Reagan is able to beat him in large part because of the hostage crisis. There's a lot of things going against Carter this year. A lot of is from his own making, but some of them beyond his control. Hostage crisis is one of them, and as we found out years later, they're behind the scenes. The Reagan campaign was negotiating with the Iranians about releasing the hostages after Carter left office, because if they didn't want a quote-unquote October surprise, i.e. the hostages being released while the campaign is in like full swing, which would be a real boon for Jimmy Carter. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Would that have been enough to get him over the top? Because a lot of people were shocked on election night 1980, because the idea of, even though he was a governor, the idea of someone who had been an actor becoming president and had said all these like radical things, that was seen as just unthinkable to a lot of people. So a lot of people still were shocked when Reagan won. But what do you think about if that counterfactual, if the hostages
I
come
feel
out.
like the hostages definitely that had a part in it, maybe like a huge part in it. And I think Reagan knew that it was going to, and that's why he did that. It's Veep did a series of episodes very similar, and it also made that election not go in the favor. But I don't know. What do you think, Freddie?
There's polls that have them close, and then he could have gotten a win from the hostages, and maybe he gets a bump and wins re-election. But possibly those polls were off, and like there was like a shy Reagan voter or something, because Reagan wins so handily.
Right.
And they even say like at the convention, like the cab drivers had been wearing Carter masks. This is in New York, in '76. But if you in '80, they're all telling you how great Reagan is. So there is a movement towards Reagan in the country, and he wins so big that it is hard to say that it would have swung it.
Yeah.
Right.
He wins huge.
Yeah. All right. Well, Nonye Brown-West, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you and your work?
You can find me at nonyecomedy.com, Nonye comedy.com, and Noni Fizzle on Instagram, NONEEFIZZLE.
And we would love to have you back to talk about Jimmy Carter's foreign policy.
Yes, please.
Until then, thank you everyone for listening. It is Vanquished.